Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about quite broadly the British government's efforts to, or proposals to, I think they're actually rolling it out, to do anti-misogyny training for young boys at school. From what I can tell, it's being pitched at high school boys, sort of first year of high school onwards, and its aims are to stop claimed aims anyway, or purported aims to stop misogyny, and so boys don't become misogynists, or if they are already, that they will not be any longer misogynists. But it's rather, how's it going to go about this, and what will it? What will the education program be? Is it education? Is it indoctrination? Is it feminist fanatics plying their nonsense that is going to have the complete opposite effect to the one intended? Remember, these were a lot of people absolutely drunk on power, and believe fanatically in the righteousness of their cause, and that all those that are not totally on board with their fanaticism are by extension outsiders, and thus evil and wicked, and so on and so forth. So the difference between a misogynist and a Nazi, it just doesn't. I mean, they're one and the same. If they're under the age of 16, they're misogynists. If they're over the age of 16, they're Nazis or fascists. So anyway, let's just have a look at this wider issue. The government's making a big. The British government, but other Western governments, make a big song and dance. We're doing something. We're getting to the root of this. If we can just change the behaviour of boys and men, that's all we have to do, just change their behaviour. Everything will be fine. It's the same with mass migration of black and brown, illiterate third world peasants into the West. If we can just change the behaviour of the white people, change their behaviour, everything will be fine. But what about changing the behaviour of the black? The brown and the black people. What you fucking Nazi, fucking Hitler racist? What about we changed the behaviour of the radical feminists? What's that? You said, you misogynist Nazi fuck. So we've got some interesting ideological issues at play here, but just coming back to this idea that misogyny, the other society is awash with misogyny. I don't agree with that, by the way, but let's just have a look at let's have the framing and the context sort of put together. Now, I remember going into a government department. It was sort of a quango, I think. I'm going from memory here, and this would, I think, have been in Australia, say around 1986, 87. Again, I was a young guy, and I remember going in, and there was a sign on a wall in the office of I think it was the deputy CEO of this quango. So it was a government thing, and it had misogyny will not be tolerated. And I looked at this, and I thought, what are they even talking about? There were all the senior executives in this thing were women, and so all the men were at lower levels, and they're all very compliant little flunkies, a lot of gay men. And the men that weren't gay were little simps that were sort of begging for crumbs from the table. So if misogyny was an issue there, then wow, it'd be hard to. So it was clearly, even as a kid, a young man, I picked up that they're talking sort of generically and ideologically rather than actuality. So there's no reality to it. They're just asserting that misogyny is a huge issue, and they're not going to tolerate they're a bunch of tough chicks, and they're not going to put up with it, and they're going to stamp it out. So it was asserted as being sort of omnipresent. It was a miasma that just was in the atmosphere, and they were going to stamp it out, even though it was nothing around them. Even then, all the women had been appointed to these senior jobs were appointed through DEI and quotas and so on. The deputy CEO actually was pretty hot, and she was the mistress of some government guy, some elected politician who was influential. So he was humping her, and then had gifted her a job that she otherwise wouldn't have got. Like the the best she could have hoped for was a low-level admin, clerk job, but there she was getting horizontalized by this politician, and that was how she got her job. Then once you had sort of a radical feminist type of people getting in there, they then employed other radical feminists. None of it on merit; it was all on ideology. So again, there was this sort of strange craziness that they insisted that misogyny was this real problem. And the men, and I remember being at a meeting to talk about commercial stuff, and I was one of a few guys there, and the other guys left, and I stayed to finish off some of the contractual issues. And this deputy CEO chick, who again was quite hot, she said, "Oh, we don't accept misogyny, or we won't tolerate misogyny around here." And I thought, well, so I asked her for a definition of misogyny, and she hummed and hemmed and hawed, and that sort of thing. Didn't really seem to know. So it's clear she was throwing it around as just an ideological term, the same way that Nazi or fascist is thrown around. It was done like that. And there was a guy in the room who was like their main sort of legal guy, and he insisted that misogyny was a real issue, and it was terrible. And this deputy CEO chick nodded and smiled approvingly at his self-effacing groveling, and yeah, his job. I think he did have his job on merit, but I think he realised that he'd be unjobbed pretty quickly if he didn't go along with the ideology, which I think is what happens pretty well. So this was in the mid-'80s, and one of the first, this was in San Francisco, I think, or somewhere around there. Could have been Silicon Valley, like further south, San Jose, around there, but I was having a meeting in a big company and fairly big organization, and there was a guy doing a technical presentation on some new upcoming technology, and he was a pretty sort of dweeby drip of a guy. You would not classify him as, he wasn't man enough to be a misogynist in the first place, but he's a nice enough guy, I guess. But he said something like, the men who developed this product, this technology that he was talking about, the men who developed this product, and the CEO who was in the room at the time, and it was a reasonably sort of packed room, some women there too. And so when the meeting ended, the CEO pulled this guy up. Again, he was a little dweeby guy. When the CEO said, "Come here," and said so with a voice of puffed out chest, sort of faux authority. And this guy nearly wet himself in fear when the CEO said that. So we're not talking any alpha male dude here, far from it. And he said, "Look, you said the men who developed this product." He said, "Yes, well, the whole development team was men." "Oh, well, that doesn't matter. You have to say the men, women, and black lesbians who developed this product, and you can't say men, and you're not allowed to, and that's misogyny." And I was close enough to hear what was being said that even when you state a fact that everyone agrees is a fact, they were still labeling it as misogyny. So you could see ideology was replacing reality. And again, this is in the 1980s. Now, also, there were various programs around at the time, and they were being heavily pushed by radical feminist groups, all of whom were NGO funded and government funded, to say that respect for relationships had to be promoted, and it had to be pushed through the schools. And there were traveling road shows that were telling boys how they were all Nazi fascist rapists, and they were oppressors, and they were, did you know, and yes and that, and there's 10 million rapes a year and all committed. But now, this was before mass migration, by the way. So this is a very important point to understand. This is before mass migration. So this was going around the schools. Even primary schools were doing, like particularly the final year of primary school, these traveling road shows were going around. And not only were they doing the finger wagging, the radical butch type lesbian type thing, not only were they doing the finger wagging, but also they were doing things like say plays, stage plays, and things like they're creating these sort of insane role-playing things in the classroom, where the teachers were, and they were nearly all female, where the teachers were, who were radicalized through the teachers training college, they were doing these things. But the whole thing was how evil boys were, how girls were oppressed, and this evil must be expunged from boys. Now, if the evil was actually there in the first place, that's one thing. But I noticed that even back then, they were particularly keen on targeting middle-class boys, the working class boys from the working class areas who are going to be the laborers and the truck drivers, where, who made up, the vast majority of whatever you might call misogynistic behavior. They didn't seem to target them, and whatever effort they made to target them was wholly unsuccessful, but quite minimal nonetheless. The real people they wanted were the middle class boys, the upper class boys. Now, the rationale, as it was explained to me by a radical feminist back in the day, was that the middle class boys, because they're all white, and this was pre-mass migration, middle class boys would move into management positions and executive positions, and they'd be hiring managers and CEOs and so on and so forth, lawyers and the like. So if they were radicalized by feminist ideology, they would then keep these other brutish, thuggish straight white males in check, and it would be part of making sure this feminist ideology permeated the workplace. I would have to argue that actually achieved some success, insofar as there are many, middle class, not British working class, but men, middle class men who do subscribe to that, or pretend to, or at least see the writing on the wall and think, well, this is the way the wind's blowing right now, so I better go along with it. That sort of thing. So there's some success there, but they particularly target. But my take on that was, well, these middle class boys, they would have been well behaved anyway. The likelihood of getting this so-called hatred of women, angry misogyny type stuff that they claim exists and is omnipresent, it's very unlikely it would come from that end of town. So they were really attempting to radicalize, as in ideologically radicalize, boys from the part of town that never would have been a problem anyway, or rarely would have been so. And again, they had some success there, I would think, this radical stuff. But that was, again, going on in the 80s and 90s. And it was doomed to fail in so much it was ideological. You can't sort of run around telling people they're Nazis and inventing studies have shown that all white boys are evil, fucking Nazi, fascist, bigot. No. That's not going to work. The power of that exists only that their children, you're an adult. When they grow up and experience the real world, they're going to look back and say, "Hey, you were lying to me. I'm annoyed about that." And that has a sort of a wave effect, as the wave goes one way and then splashes back and the other, and that's very much what I think has happened in a lot of instances. Now, coming to the issue of where Andrew Tate is supposed. Andrew Tate's definitely the bogeyman. I mean, he's not quite a Hitler status yet, but gee whiz, not far off. So now I've looked at some of the Andrew Tate videos. Not my way of looking at the world, and not something I'd recommend to, if I had, lots of sons that say, "Oh, Andrew Tate," you go, no. But if they watched Andrew Tate or looked at his videos like that, but would be interested in making sure they heard and saw and considered other points of view. But a lot of Andrew Tate says is reasonably accurate. He says that the Western world's been feminized, and that's been to the disadvantage of the Western world, not only in birth rates, but in other areas. And who can really dispute that? That's a fairly accurate take on things. I mean, Andrew Tate's no genius, by the way, but his thuggish practicality hits the mark sometimes. Now, Andrew Tate's also, as I understand it, a Muslim. Doesn't appear to be a particularly devout one, but his views on how society should be structured, how men should behave, and again, not my scene, but he's got elements of reality there that say, well, look, the Western society is failing. This is what it should be doing. Now, his remedies are probably less realistic and than some might believe, but generally I wouldn't see him as a threat at all. So why he's being used as a bogeyman is, I think it's just so they can just put a face to it and say, look, here's a bad guy. But he's like a mixed race brown dude and Islamic. So the people that are denouncing Andrew Tate are Islamic phobic fucking Nazi Hitlers. Oh no, wait, no, hold on. He's a misogynist though. Now, while they were doing misogynist or anti-misogynist training, well, they're also doing misandry training, the hatred of men. Well, no, that never happens. So, but wouldn't that be part of respect for a relationship? No. It's the misogynists, the Nazis we have to control. So again, you come down to this factor where when it comes to gender relations, only men must be controlled. When it comes to race relations, only white people must be controlled. And that pretty much gives the game away. There's nothing realistic, serious, or it's just simply controlling the white people, particularly white men, as they may get in the way of the globalist project. That's all it is. And they're just inventing social crimes to be able to justify their ideological, fanatical, and heavy-handed approach. So this idea of misogyny training in different forms and different names and so on has been going on for 30 plus years, 40 years, getting on for 40 years. It's been going on, and now every year goes by, Western governments spend more and more money and put more and more time and hyperventilate sort of more often about this supposed misogyny epidemic. So the more resources they put into it, the worse it gets. So either it never existed in the first place and they've invented it, which I think is more to the point, or they're misunderstanding or mislabeling what they claim is misogyny. And when you look at the definitions of misogyny, for example, if they say if a woman is talking and a man talks while the woman is talking, it's misogyny. But in the reverse, if the man's talking and the woman interrupts, it's equality. So again, you can see the absurdity of the age. It's so one-sided and just one direction only, as these things tend to be, that it's quite absurd. But the idea of misogynist everywhere has infected the legal system. And you see this with particularly, as I've mentioned many times now, if it's a brown or a black person, say, commits rape, you've usually got them dead to rights. That they're on camera, they're witnesses. You've got the whole thing there, and so there's no doubt about getting guilty. So typically, they'll take a plea bargain, saying, "Look, you'll get 20 years in prison, but if you plea it, we'll give you 6 years, for example. You'll be out in 4." But if it's the straight white guy who has committed not violent rape, but technical rape, it was a consensual sex, but she had one drink too many or something. Therefore, it's technically she couldn't give consent. That type of stuff. For technical rape, then all the resources of the state, all of it will be mobilised to go after the straight white guy, middle class guy in particular. And, they're going to get him. They're going to bring him down. They're going to fucking get that Nazi misogynist, no matter how much collateral damage to the legal system is involved. So again, we see this double standard here. Now, on the issue of importing vast numbers of people from not only Islamic faiths, but Africa and places like that, where it's common practice that one man will impregnate 10 women. It's just how the customs are in Africa, and that's again, and black men in the United States behave pretty much the same way, or many of, not all of them. And it's not unusual to see a 27-year-old black woman with 6 children from 6 different men. And you think, how's that even possible? But when you look at African society and its social structures, and particularly its gender relationships, you see that that's quite a normal way of doing business in those places. Similarly, in places like Afghanistan, 5 or 6 children per woman, and Pakistan, Bangladesh, those sort of places. And it's from these areas that a lot of people are being brought into the West, and they have very different views on gender relations and all sorts of things like that. So is the misogyny training being targeted at Islamic kids? Well, no, and it appears that Islamic kids can demand and get exemption from these misogyny training courses that are compulsory for all white boys. White boys can't claim exemption, but Islamic boys can. Now, it's not, you don't have to be a mathematical genius or an actuary or something like that to work out that the definitions of misogyny that they're using represent the normal standard behavior of Islamic, most Islamic men in the very concept, particularly in the tribal third world type environments that they come from. But those boys are to be exempt from the misogyny training. So again, it's really only white boys are being held up. And when you see adverts all over the Western world of who are the evil fascist, Nazi, misogynistic oppressors of women, they always present it as being white boys, always, or white men. I don't think I've ever seen an advert where no, I haven't actually. I've never seen an advert where they present the brown and black men who are the primary, by far and away, the primary perpetrators. They're never featured in the advert, and it seems they're being given a free pass at school. So exactly what is this misogyny thing all about? You've been attached to us today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.